Welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going well. We're happy to be back here. We have another string of Q&As today.
Yeah. So before we start that, any training updates? How goes like riding in the heat? All the things.
Well, I think I'm pretty fit, but I'm lacking a firm goal at the moment, so I need to address that a little bit. But we're rolling along here. We are trying to sell our condo.
Yes, if anyone's looking for a condo in the Collingwood, Ontario area.
Yes, we can leave you Consummate Athlete branded things on the wall if you want.
I'm debating if that's extra or if we'll actually knock down from the price if we leave up Consummate Athlete stuff.
Right. So we're doing that, but things are rolling along, doing a fair number of skill sessions right now as well. So work always gets busy in the summer, which is the nature of things for me. So I wrestle with this, but we've had a string of crashes and illnesses, but we've also had some decent results. We had road nationals here in Canada over the past weekend, so a couple decent showings there. And then what else did we have? We'll talk about Western States. We didn't have anyone in Western States, but we are big consumers of the Western States running 100-miler.
I'm so perplexed by your like deep adoration of the Western States live feed for like 2 years.
I don't like watching really sports very much at all, and certainly don't like sitting still for a long time. So I don't know why I chose a 14-hour running race to be like just like adamant, like setting a day apart to watch 14 hours of racing.
It's like I can barely get you to watch cycling, and here you are texting me from a baseball game where you're sneaking like YouTube coverage of Western States like while you're in line at the concession stand, which is just, I love you so much.
That's right. Yeah, just getting in and listening to like my phone while I'm driving even. I wasn't watching it, but I was listening to the live stream, which is, I don't know if that's more boring than watching people run 100-milers is listening to someone try and talk about the spotty coverage of the 100-mile running race.
Yeah, very weird character trait of yours, but I love it for you.
And then maybe as a sneak, we have a couple questions about preparing for big European climbs that maybe are steep and are going to challenge our cadence and gearing. So maybe some lower RPM work and muscle tension, you might call that. What was the other question we had there?
Some good mountain bike stage race fun, and then we're gonna kind of chat through our Western States takeaways.
Okay, but just as the teaser, and then you have one secret question.
I have one secret question.
You said you didn't want to tell me beforehand, so this is a big cliffhanger. I hope it's really a gotcha journalism.
It
here.
Is not that juicy
against your spouse. But yeah, the BC bike race, the stage race prep one, I think will be interesting because it's sort of like, I've run out of time. What do I do? Maybe it's the week of BC bike race. Maybe BC bike race has already started by the time we're giving these thoughts, but perhaps we'll help you for the next time you're not prepared for something, which will happen. So
for sure.
That's what's coming. So we want to start here with Western States.
Okay. I mean, I guess like what are you thinking here? Like what's your takeaway?
Well, I mean, for those who don't know, I don't think a lot of our listeners maybe were even cued into this, but this is pretty much the biggest 100-mile, maybe just the biggest ultra in North America, I would say.
Probably arguably the world. Like there is UTMB, but I'm going to say I think Western States, like, and maybe this is just the North American centric side of me, like thinking that, but I do think, I mean, it's now bringing in a lot of international talent. It's sort of one of just like the most famed ones, I guess.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So yeah, I would say there could be other races for sure, but
I guess it's also the most like 100-miler. Like UTMB is very climby. It's very mountainous. It seems
just ridiculous.
It almost extends beyond ultra and gets kind of into like it's mountain running and an ultra. Whereas I think Western States is more of a classic, like I think it is just like 10,000 feet of climbing, maybe a titch more, but it's not such a climbing race that it really kind of falls into like the mountains category. So it's very much like 100-miler.
Sure. And so in running, you sort of see a bit of this change where there's like real European races. This probably resonates with cycling too, right? Where there's this European, maybe it's maybe it's more embedded in the culture. And then in or in North America, there's this like maybe faster racing because their mountains aren't quite as severe. What else? I don't know. I guess it's sort of like crit racing is like a very like North American thing, isn't it? Where the crit racing doesn't really happen in Europe.
Yeah, exactly. So it's basically the crit race of the ultra running set.
I guess. Yeah.
I think that might be pushing it.
Now this race that we're talking about, this Western States, it's at altitude. It's relatively hilly. I don't think someone would say there's no hills. But then again, the men are finishing. They're trying to get under this 14-hour, which, spoiler, they didn't this past year. It was exciting though. And then the women were 16 or what was
16 and change.
Yeah, okay. And then very tight women's race. Actually, all three of them came in. I don't know what it was at the end, maybe 20-minute total gap between them, which in 100-mile terms is pretty tight.
For sure.
So that was exciting and very tight till the end. So like a lot of these things, it came down sort of to the wire in a few different ways, whether it was the placing of the races and then also sort of chasing these records where so many of the running records, and maybe that's why I'm interested in it, is running is just at this place where there's all these world records in track and the fastest course times at things like Leadville and then Western States where they're trying to beat these record times. So they had this record time for the men and the women's as well that they were trying to beat. And everyone was saying, oh, with the carbs, everyone's having more carbs now. And then everyone's, what's the other thing? I guess the heat training. Everyone's doing heat training. And then the shoes, that was the big one. The big one was these shoes with the bouncy carbon plates in them. That's why we're seeing a lot of these records coming down, is that the shoes have really evolved versus, say, 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, depending on when the records were.
And I think maybe you find that interesting too, because in cycling, we don't really have records the same way we do in running, right?
The Tour de France is amazing every year, but they can only compare like the average speed of the race, which is a little variable, or how fast they went up Mount Ventoux.
You would never compare, like, yeah, technically there's like Strava KOMs, but like you would never really compare like, oh, this Tour de France did this stage, 2K faster than they did last year. It just wouldn't really, like, that's maybe a little like asterisk in an article about that stage, but it wouldn't really be any kind of like amazing, like record breaking thing, just because so many variables come into play with, how the peloton is going, or, bike tech. I don't know. It's not really a thing that we care about in cycling.
Yeah, and I would say from my perspective, it's also just a friend, Tara, who has worked as a physio for Cycling Canada and for different downhill teams and just cycling teams. She posted something that really resonated about sort of like, you do something you love, and then the cliched phrase is like, and then you'll never work a day in your life, but the never work a day in your life was crossed out, and it was sort of like, and then you'll work really hard, and you'll get really mad about anything that people say about it. So I think that's where sometimes I run into where, because I've coached and raced a lot, I'm always just trying to be cognizant that I need to be careful, like how much cycling stuff I consume and do, because it's so much of our day, really, right? And then you do it too, so it's like I can't even talk to my spouse about something else. So I think the fact that you've gotten into running has been really quite good, and I think that's why when I spectate something, sometimes it's more interesting to watch something different versus, I just spent the 2 hours before we're talking on this cycling podcast, cycling/running/movement podcast. I just spent staring at race results and people's power data, right? So it's sort of like that tough thing where a lot of times what people do for recreation is different than what they do for work. And I don't begrudge it, but that was sort of a tangent on my life, I guess.
Well, and then the funny thing I think is like, I don't really follow ultra running. You actually follow it much more closely than I do because I do it. So it's not something I'm actually like super interested in, like actually following along with, because I'd rather just show up and race and not really think through who's in the field or anything. But it is funny then I actually, and part of that is probably because I actually cover a lot of bike racing. So I actually need to be like following along with bike racing. And you know what? Your brain really only has so much space in it to follow along with like one type of racing. So speaking of which, I will be doing a lot of the Tour de France commentary for Bicycling magazine. So if you are not a member, we talk all the time about how, yes, it's great when there are free like live streams of things and all of that, but I'm a big proponent of like supporting the media that you want to see more of. So whether that's the Flow Bike subscription to watch the tour, Bicycling's like membership in order to like get the articles, get the videos, all that stuff. support these sources because we want to have them around. So definitely check that out. And I will actually be covering some of the stages of the Tour de France with my friend Whit. And then I'll cover the entire Tour de France Femmes for bicycling. So I'm very excited for that. So check that out.
Awesome.
Okay, but actual takeaways from Western States coming back.
As we wander through my life and things that I do with it, the reason I like watching is I think there's a lot of comparable things that you learn from other sports. So I do like cycling, and I still, that's what I'm coaching. And so what I find is, and goes along with my kinesiology degree, and just I love the training of any sports. I was at a baseball game while I was trying to watch Western States through my earpiece with my dad and brother over the past weekend, and I just love seeing what they're doing for training and how they prepare and how do they warm up and what is the trendy thing that they're doing. Are they swinging their bats with weights? Or are they, how are they preparing? How are they warming up? Are they doing any like mental visualization? So all these sports have a lot of things that we would recognize from the world of cycling or running or whatever you're into, and that might relate. So with Western States, the thing that I really like to see is how are they carrying the stuff? Like, are they doing the packs, the vests, which again relates to cycling because we use packs and vests in some of these endurance things. And then the aid stations are really developing really quickly. But I think because the aid stations were more of a party in the past in these ultra 100-mile runs, no one was in a big rush, or very few people were. So no one really thought about it. And the gaps were so big that no one was really thinking, oh, what if we just took 30 seconds or even just passed it without stopping? Whereas in cycling, we've been not stopping forever. You rarely stop in Tour de France. They just take the musette bags. And most of the front of 100-mile races now are barely stop. Maybe they stop for these pit stops you're seeing in Unbound where they spray the chain off, lube the chain, bottle, and then the person's already thrown their pack and they take a new pack and then they're gone in 15 seconds, 10 seconds.
Well, and I mean, that's like the whole spirit of gravel, like debate a couple of years ago was that people were, really kind of up in arms that was changing, that we were going to this faster pit stop, like NASCAR style mentality rather than the like party through the aid station thing.
Well, and with running, there's all this mechanical load and the risk of foot, whatever. It's any number of things that happen to your feet is one of the biggest. So you used to see people changing their shoes a lot. And now that's like getting a flat tire in cycling. Yes, it might happen, but ideally it doesn't happen. And they, again, keep going through and they don't change their shoes. So when you see someone changing your shoes, it's almost like watching someone get their flat fixed or swapped in a mountain bike race.
Well, it's funny, because I even think about, my first 100-miler in 2022 compared to what we did at Sulphur Springs. And, 2022, granted, weather was different, right? Like, we did a full costume change as it got dark because I was, like, a little sweaty and it was about to go, negative temperatures. So, like, we wanted to do this whole change. But I remember, we changed my shoes. We did all this stuff. And, we had time to spare in that one, to be honest. Like, there was nobody around me, so why not? But then, when I think to how we evolved that in Sulphur Springs, like, as I was watching the footage of Western States and they were showing the transition zones, I was like, actually pretty psyched on how you and I handled Sulphur Springs because I think we were about as fast as those guys were. But I mean, when you say like pit stop though, like, yes, they weren't changing shoes, but they're, the lead runners would have like 4 crew people dumping water on them to like cool them down because it got quite hot. They're one person's switching the pack, one person's handing them like a fresh bottle to kind of drink while they're getting sprayed down. The other person's spraying them down. Maybe there's like a hat change, bit of sunscreen reapplication, that kind of thing. But just so fast. It was literally like, in NASCAR when you have like all of the guys, 12 people, like 3 to a tire changing out the wheels or whatever. Right. You can tell I don't really watch NASCAR as I'm trying to explain this, but everyone knows what I'm talking about.
Most cars have 4. Did you say 3?
I said 3 people per. Yeah.
I think they probably would run 4 for the 4 wheels, but at least. So, yeah, I think that's that. And then the cooling was a big thing. You'd see them, the commentators would say, oh, that person didn't take on ice. And that was like one of the big things were people taking on, dousing with water and then taking ice bandanas or ice socks or whatever with them. And then if they didn't, it was sort of like, oh, are they rushing through this too fast and then skipping the benefits of the cooling? Because it was approaching 100 degrees, I believe, in places. So the cooling, again, a crossover thing that in cycling now we're thinking a lot about cooling in a lot of races.
Yeah. And I mean, I think what was really interesting, so obviously heat was a huge factor in this race. A couple of the top guys actually ended up dropping out, including our good friend David Roche, in part due to the heat. And what I thought was interesting about that is a lot of these guys, again, including David, and it's not just the heat that like took any of these guys out, but I think it was a pretty major factor, you could say.
Sure.
A lot of these guys were talking a lot about how they were doing their heat training. They were showing, Kilian Jornet, like goat of ultra running, mountain running, etc., did all these videos showing how he was training with heat indoors, all that stuff. David obviously has talked about that ad nauseum. Yet the heat still got to a lot of people. I would actually love to see sort of like who did specific heat training versus who didn't,
right,
and how that stacked up in the results.
Yeah.
And part of that's due to also just like where people live, I'm sure. Like Kilian talks about in his video with it, he doesn't live in an area that gets that hot. So heat training is kind of something he has to do because otherwise he's training in just lovely temperate climates all the time.
Right. And
Poor
it was
guy.
interesting. He seemed to be, and you don't know what people are doing behind closed doors, except for David, I guess, whose thing was called No Secrets. He had a big video series if you're indoors and want to watch something or put it onto the winter playlist, I guess, even for your trainer season. He was pretty open. He's a wild guy. We love him. But just sort of open with how he was trying to come from not really being a 100-mile runner to take on some of the best in the world. And he's one of the big takeaways I had was that his and then also Jim Walmsley is the record holder and one of the favorites, and he was really pushing because he knew this was going to be a big year where a lot of people were coming and gunning for it, and he wanted to beat his own record and just continue to progress as an athlete. And he said like he was getting knee pain last year a bit and then tried to get it back and then wanted to race before Western States this year. So he raced in near where we were for our bike tour in the fall with Ngamba in the Chianti region.
I'm trying to convince them that we need to host a ultra endurance running camp there.
A Consummate Athlete weekend maybe in the Chianti region. And so they did the Chianti Classico, I think it's called, and it's one of the...
no, that's the Ngamba tour.
Maybe it's the wine. Who knows? Maybe it's the wine now. But anyhow, this was one of the qualifiers for this Western States because you have to qualify. It's actually quite hard to get into the race. So Jim and this Kilian Jornet, who's one of the best ultra runners of all time, they came and they dueled, but then Jim's knee got even more injured during that race. So then he couldn't race. So I mentioned a few of the athletes had some crashes. We've had some illnesses here. And we say this is bike racing, right? Maybe this is running, but that's the phrase that is, that's bike racing. And what that means is you're either injured before you get to the race, or in David's case, he charged as hard as he could, somewhat, maybe he charged too hard, but you got to do what you think is right and try and get there and do the best race you can. But even that aside, he DNF'd and he is pretty good. And so he's now won 200 milers in pretty good, like Leadville, he set the record and won Leadville, one of the most storied races in North America, at least. And then he's DNF too, I think now. And I could be wrong. The other DNF might have been in a 50 mile or 100
Yeah,
or
it's a
something.
50 milers, ankle sprains.
So his hit rate is still 2 out of 300 milers he's won. But then he DNF'd this one. And then it's like, well, so he's very sad and people are sad. A lot of people are behind it. But that's actually not a bad hit rate. Like, again, I was just at a baseball game and I was telling Molly, like, if you're a home run hitter, you actually strike out a lot. And even a good batter, like a consistent batter is, I think, like a 4 out of 10. So 400 would be an amazing season of batting.
Right.
For the batting average. So it's this thing, just this reminder that they can't possibly all be wins. And if they are, that's not what we're there for. We're there for this event where there was 15 people that could have won that race. And how exciting is this?
Well, and it also reminds me of, I've now cited it so many times when I was talking to Lauren Stevens, who's, one of the most decorated American women cyclists, huge in the North American circuit, has had like a crazy good season so far with stage racing, won Tour of the Gila, like all these things. And I was talking to her and she did the Sea Otter Classic gravel race. And she said when she started the race, there's sort of 2 options in racing. One is you can go out planning for your personal best day, or you can go out planning to win. And going out for your personal best day is going to look a lot different than going out and planning to win. Going out and planning to win means you could detonate, but you're going to go with the moves. You're going to set the pace. You're going to do the things that could very well lead to you not having your best day that you could have. But if it goes right, you win the damn thing. And I think that's what David did. And I think, to me, like, that's racing at the front. Like, there's a lot of people that would go out on that race trying to just have their personal best day. And I said this at the end of Sulphur Springs, like when I was doing that quick interview at the end, like, I didn't go out thinking I was going to have my best personal day. I went out thinking I was going to win the stupid race. And I think, that can either spectacularly blow up. Like, I was on a pace that very easily could have caused me to blow up because I had never run anything at that kind of pace before. I don't even know that I've done 50 milers at that pace before. And I think David was the exact same. He went out knowing he was going to go on record pace. He was going to go faster at the beginning because that's where he thought the record could be broken. Right. And that means you're going out with the awareness that it might not work out for you. And I think that's still just something that, like, I applaud so much because it's very hard to do, to decide that you are going to race potentially outside of your capabilities and have that chance that it's not going to go the way you want it to go.
For sure. And I think for the rest of us where it's maybe not for the win, that's sometimes where you have to edge in is you're going to push a little harder or a little longer. So it might not even be an exact process goal that you're executing, but it might be sticking onto that group when you're breathing really hard at the beginning of a 100-miler and then settling in and finding out, oh, it's okay. Like but I may be a little further up or in a better group than before. And to Molly's point, you might find out that you misjudged it and you pushed for too long and now it really is bad, or you have to take a break, or you finish 10 minutes slower than you could have finished had you paced perfectly.
Yeah, I think it becomes a problem when every single race ends with you going overboard and DNFing.
And so a lot of people, that's their experience. Yeah.
That means you are clearly overpacing yourself rather than, like, conscientiously going for this thing that might be just outside your capabilities, but you might be able to make it. Like, there is a level of rationality that you need to have in order to do that.
And so what you'll often see is you can see that in the heart rate or the power file. If there's a huge fade and you like are cracking early and then suffering the entire race, then those people probably are the people to try either a heart rate target or just letting the lead group go and then just riding your own pace early and just seeing what happens. You don't again, there's lots of races you can take on. So just playing with that and knowing yourself, but definitely that being at the front of the race and the racing dynamics. It struck me that even in that race, like that's almost a little new that there is this pack racing even for the first part of the race, at least.
I mean, yeah, like I've never seen video of that start with like packs of men and like a pack of men, a pack of women going up that first climb, tight together and not just like getting up it, racing up it.
And so what happens there though is, especially on a hot day, what I think a lot of people found was that a few people were overextended, which is how bike racing is. There's a few people who are sitting in the group and they're the people that are going to win and they're going hard, but they're not necessarily overextended, but then everyone else is sort of already burning matches to keep up at a pace they're well over.
Which I think is like, this is kind of one of the interesting things with ultra running is that you don't have to do that. Bike racing, you kind of have to stay with that lead group if you're going to win, because it's almost impossible to bridge up from like the back.
Well, and there's the draft
when you don't have the power of the peloton behind you, that kind of thing. Like if you get dropped off the peloton, you're done. Ultra running, I think, is actually like, I think that's actually to their detriment that they all decided to go out at that same pace instead of, sticking to plans, sticking to personal paces. I think that might actually be why you saw such, harsh drop-offs in the men's and women's fields.
For sure.
Because people are now like scared of sticking to their own plan. They see the move going, but it's like, it's ultra running. It's not cycling. Like there's no draft.
Right. And it's not like single track, even in this race. You could always pass someone.
Oh, there's so much passing in this race. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's that. I mean, this event also has a camp before it, which you've done before, and it's sort of 3 days, pretty low key. But if anyone was looking for like a little vacation running adventure, you could run the whole course, which wouldn't be easy over 3 days.
Well, not the whole course. It's like 70 miles of the course.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Why don't they do the whole thing?
I think because there's still snow at the top is the
Oh,
reason.
of course. Yeah, because it's earlier in the year. Is that like a May?
It's mid-May. Okay. It's super fun. And I mean, it's still 70 miles over 3 days. I think the other reason is because like that would be a really burly camp to do 100 miles in 3 days. Right. It's like 2 20s and a 30. But highly recommend. It's actually very inexpensive. It's very low key. It's very, very fun. It's a good place to meet people. And if Western States is like, if that's any interest to you, whether you like it as a fan or you're kind of like, oh, one day I'd love to do it, honestly, go do that. It's so fun. And it just makes watching it a lot more fun later because then you're like, oh yeah, I've run here. I know this.
And these exist for cycling for, I think, Unbound and the Leadville ones. The Leadville ones are pricier. Like anything Lifetime, I guess, is probably going to be pricier. But these are things, a lot of the people listening, and a lot of people we work with even are not all into racing. Maybe they do 1 or 2 races, but they might do something like a tour or some sort of camp. And so we point this out just because these are another thing that is a little competitive, or social comparison is going to happen at something like this. And you can see some of these historic courses and go to it. It's something that you have on the calendar, but it's not necessarily world championships or something that some people might not want to get involved in. So yeah, maybe just another thing to ponder. And you had a great week when you were there.
I had so much fun. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Before we get into our next question, a quick word from our sponsors over at Payable. So Payable is an add-on for Google Forms that allows you to take payments in the Google form, which sounds like a thing that you should be able to do. And now you can. And when I tell you this is like what, this is what I do for all of my authors at Strong Girl Publishing so they can sell their books in real life, online, however they want to sell them. It's been a game changer for being able to do that, because before it was they'd have to collect cash, or they'd have to like get someone to, there just wasn't a credit card option. So you're basically hoping for cash, or now they're e-transferring, but then to that person instead of to Strong Girl Publishing. And it was just such a mess. Mm-hmm. And this has made it so much easier for me to keep track of, what our authors are able to sell in real life, and just has made it so simple because, we're not talking massive amounts of sales where I want to pay for like a really expensive, like give each one of them like a Square card reader and all that kind of stuff. I just wanted it to be a really simple way for when they're out and about to be able to sell books. And it's been awesome.
That's right. So it just puts it in a Google Sheet and you can track all your orders that way. Everyone's used Google Forms on either one side or the other of the Google form, whether you're putting it out or filling one out. And so that's all it is. And you only pay sort of per transaction. There's the credit card fees and then a little bit of the quote unquote payable fee, which is not very much. And so we love it. And you can get a discount on these fees.
Yes, payableapps.com/athlete, and that has all of the info about the discounts you can get. Also, our favorite templates that are great for whether you're doing T-shirt sales, Girl Scout cookie sales, pizza day at school, all of the different use cases. There are free templates to just kind of get you started, so you are pretty much up and selling in minutes. So again, payableapps.com/athlete, and we'll include a link to that in the show notes. Okay, this next question, I admit, did not come in to us, but we love the guys over at BC Bike Race, and when they posted this very funny reel, we were like, we have to cover this. So it was a good Ron Swanson Parks and Rec joke, but it was about Google's how to train for BCBR in 1 week, because we are 1 week out from the race. And of course, it probably does not go super great when you are sitting Googling how to train for BCBR in 1 week, considering that is a 6-day, pretty intense mountain bike stage race.
Mm-hmm. As far as the distances, it's not like some of the European ones where you're doing massive days, or something like Cape Epic or La Ruta that are just notorious for being 12-hour days and extreme heat and fire and whatever. But I guess this one sometimes does have heat and the risk of fire. So fingers crossed that all that's okay. But I do think they're moving this one. So this is one of the last times you can do this. I think you can do it again next year. And then they're changing BC Bike Race. So it is a bucket list one. So we'll put that in there if you haven't gotten on. And I don't know if there's any spots left for next year, the 2026 one, but probably would be something to look into if you're looking to get it before it disappears and turns into whatever it's going to turn into. We've had a friend who worked up north in one of these industries, mining or whatever is up there, and they were up there for 6 weeks, as I recall, and they had to stay because of bears and weather and everything else. They had to stay basically in a small room for 6 weeks, and there wasn't a gym or necessarily anything like that. So really not a lot of exercise, really not even a lot of just activities of daily living where, maybe you walk to work in a city, you live in a city and you're getting some sunshine and this sort of thing. It was just basically if you could design a study where it was, well, how little can a person do for 6 weeks and then throw them into a stage race, which is sort of like how much activity can someone put out and how coordinated do they need to be on these technical mountain bike trails. And so they got through the race, and they said it was actually awkward because one of the topics at dinner at these events is, oh, what did you do for training? Did you get a coach? Did you follow a training plan? How many hours did you ride before? Sort of comes up, but you can see how that would happen as you're talking to people, especially if they're wondering why you're beating them. And so this person was telling us that there was this awkward, and they had to lie. They had to be, oh yeah, no, I ride a bit, and like my spouse or whatever rides, and we would ride, but just left out the part of it, the 6 weeks of inactivity and isolation before this. So all this to say, it's very possible, but it does depend on what you're coming into the challenge with, on how possible and how enjoyable this is going to be.
Yeah. So, I mean, okay, 1 week out, we can do kind of whatever we want. Let's maybe start with what we wouldn't do, which is trying to emulate the stage race by doing a massive week on the bike, which I think would be the temptation of someone who's panic training, right? Mm-hmm. Is like cram it in. Right. Don't do that.
You got to be careful. And this is where knowing what was happening beforehand. So if someone's been doing nothing for a long time, you do want to be careful because the bike race is going to be risky from an increase in, you could say, the acute chronic ratio, or this is where you have zero fitness and then suddenly you have to do a lot. So it's going to be a big increase, which is when we have a risk for illness, injury, burnout. So what could you do in that week before? Well, probably you should start riding. And so I would probably go on like a bit of a ride most days of the week, maybe even do one little longer one. If you have really flexible time in the week before, maybe try and get on your bike for 2 or 3 hours. And then maybe you do a bunch of maybe an hour rides. Again, you want to be careful. If you've been riding a little bit, then you could probably get up into that 90-minute range. But the big things, like training wise, it almost doesn't matter, but you should probably start getting into the routine of riding because that will help ease the sudden increase you're going to see in the stage race. The other thing that came to me, though, is that you're probably more into the preparation and the equipment.
Yes, that was exactly where I was going to go with that too. Also sleep. Sleep would actually be one of my big things I would put in because those stage races do, it gets hard to sleep at those. I mean, especially depending if you're camping or doing any of the, you're not in a hotel by yourself, you're in a hotel with a friend, you're camping, you're, staying in a just like unknown situation. You're probably going to be really light on sleep for race week. So being, very caught up on sleep, being very well rested, being,
just get into athlete like monk mode
exactly
beforehand. Yeah.
Like hydrated, rested, like well fed. I'm not talking like carb load every night before the race or anything, but just like you're just coming in kind of the best place mentally and physically that you can. You're not wrecked from riding big days. You didn't suddenly decide to go on like max leg press or something. You're just paying attention to that stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think really this is where the gear part would really come into play. So
our friend who did it, they had their bike pristine. It had been completely gone over. They gave it like a good practice ride before they left for the 6 weeks. It was sparkling clean. It was, I think, I don't know if they shipped it and it got it built at the site and then it was waiting. I think they had friends there or whatever. I can't recall if they lived out in BC or not at the time. But in any case, the bike, they tried to minimize down the road how much of that stuff. And then our usual, like they had a pack they had used before that was going to have some fuel in it, have some fueling options, and then have all the tools they needed, reliable tires with some sealant. I guess maybe you'd want to double check your sealant hadn't just all hardened in the bottom after 6. Maybe someone could rotate your wheels periodically over the 6 weeks. You almost need like one of those pet feeders to rotate the tires to keep the sealant from going. But
I feel like a good engineer could figure that out. That would actually be an amazing like bike rack to have in your garage. One that would actually like
rotates all the wheels from your many bicycles. Yeah. Is there anything else? So I think that's great. Just the healthier you can be in that week before, the better, without going to extremes. Like you don't need any Uber supplements or you don't need any of this other stuff. But that's good. All the equipment ready, the tools ready, the fueling stuff ready.
Yeah, if this is 7 days out when you're listening to this, somehow you've Googled this and you've found our podcast.
There's lots of races you cannot be prepared.
You've Googled this, you found our podcast. If you're 7 or 8 days out now, today is the day to bring your bike to the shop for a once-over, not 2 days before.
Well, and maybe even better, maybe ride it and then see if anything is out of thing. A lot of times in stage races, you're going to find if there's wet weather, people will blow through their pads because they have old pads that are already worn. And then if you get a muddy day and the right type of soil conditions and a lot of braking, which in BC bike race, you're going down fun, but technical descents. So you would blow through your pads and potentially have to finish a stage with only one working brake, or you have no brakes, which gets dicey, and now you're running a bunch of stuff. So that would be the type of stuff, like the common things. People flat, they don't have sealant in their tires, they ding a rim. So again, something like BC bike race, probably you're going to run some inserts, at least on the rear. And then just making sure that you have everything isn't worn out, janky old chains and the bike shifts and that sort of stuff. So to Molly's point, get it to the shop, but maybe give it a ride so you can sort of suss out, like, is it functioning?
Yeah, and definitely like bring those extras, because it is sometimes really hard to source brake pads,
right.
Tires, chains,
if it's a wet
all that
year,
stuff.
they'll run out of pads. So then it's nice to have the pads that fit your bike, because that's the other thing, is they might not have the pads that fit your bike. So if you have them, you can either install them or someone else can install them, and the mechanic will be very happy if you just have your pads on hand and you just need them stuffed into the bike. That makes their life a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect.
Well, so I think I'm thinking towards training. And so if we wanted to get nitty gritty, we have a week. This is our sort of case study. I would probably get one ride. So let's say it starts on Saturday. Is it Saturday or is it Monday?
Let's say it's Saturday.
So then on that weekend, Saturday or Sunday, I would try and get out on my mountain bike or race bike, depending on the race you're doing. But the race bike for probably 3 hours with the pack, with the fuel, the sugar, and I want you to just try and get the sugar down, whatever you're going to fuel with, whether that's bars or sugar powder or gels, and just try and simulate. Like, that would be the day to be like, I'm doing basically even a stage. Maybe you are out there and you can pre-ride a stage or a part of a stage, and just try and see, how is my gut going to handle this fueling? Because the biggest thing, and this is what our friend did, they made really sure that they were pacing. They weren't trying to be the one at the front. They knew that they only had so many bullets and they were on borrowed time. And so they would try and just not rush, go at the pace that they could go at. Maybe there was a bit of a perceived exertion or a breathing test, and not trying to breathe too hard, because they were just trying to finish. They weren't trying to win or get age group championship of the world, just trying to finish. So they weren't trying to get breathing super hard at any point. This is just pacing. But then what supports pacing is the fueling. But if you start getting GI distress because you've never had sugar powder, and then you start jamming 100 grams of carbohydrate into your gut, this is going to be tough. So the week out, the weekend before, we try and get a ride that looks sort of like a stage. Again, these stages aren't usually long in BC bike race, but they take enough time, especially if you're not the fittest person out there. Get the fuel in. Molly said, okay, well then maybe Monday you have an appointment, the bike's going to get a once over. Maybe that day you just go for a walk, or if you have a road bike, you could just do like a quick 30, 60 minute swing. Because again, we're assuming you haven't been doing a lot of training, because that's what the question was I haven't been training, and then I'm doing the stage race in a week. And then I would say Tuesday to Friday, maybe like another little short mountain bike race, or mountain bike ride. And then we get maybe a couple little openers. So I'm thinking these short-term adaptations, we're trying to get consistent training that's going to help get that blood plasma volume up. So just by getting out for 30, 60, 90 minutes, you're going to keep getting the body to start adapting. Your heart rate's very high when you start training or come back to training. We want that to disappear, and that'll take 3, 4, 5 days. So if you're consistent in getting some exercise in, the heart rate up, maybe a bit of just, if it's hot out, that's going to help a little bit. I don't think we're not talking about kooky heat training here at all, but trying to just get where your body's sweating, and then the next day it's sweating, and do that for 3, 4, 5 days. You're going to see that the heart rate normalizes for you, and that's like a quick adaptation a fitness adaptation that you can see in the short term. I would augment that maybe 2 times during those Tuesday to Friday, maybe on Friday and maybe on Tuesday or Wednesday. You do sort of like these openers. So say something like a 30 to 60 second effort. Maybe you're doing 5 of those, just sort of what we might call openers, but more like anaerobic, like really sort of getting yourself really breathing during those to get a bit of that race pace. But again, we know that those adaptations, those anaerobic, those sort of sprint type adaptations can come pretty quickly. So if we're trying to just do the best we can with that week, I think we have a specific endurance workout, maybe the weekend before. That's more for the gut and the fueling and the testing all the gear before you get it to the bike shop. And then some of these opener workouts just to practice breathing hard, get your muscles activated, maybe get some sort of like micro percentage increase in fitness just from doing a bit of this, like what we might call high intensity interval training. And then back to like what Molly's saying, in bed early, bike is super clean, super dialed, as good as you can make, because we know the equipment gains, you can pay your way through those and you can spend time working on those. And every time you make your bike work better, it's going to be beneficial. Whereas the biking, like it's just, you're going to fatigue yourself before you even get to the race. So you're better to just be there healthy and motivated and prepared. And then you're sort of there on race day.
Love it. Love it. Okay. Next question comes back to actually some of our talk about cadence. So I've been working on my cadence for a while, and as I look this month at the massive mountain passes I'll be riding in the Pyrenees, I realize that it's fine to look at the pros pedaling at 95 RPM up the Tourmalet and think that's the cadence I should practice. But in reality, on a climb that big and in my easiest gear, there's no way that I would be able to hold that kind of cadence. Should I be practicing pedaling squares, meaning at a very low cadence where it feels like you're kind of pressing like out, down, back, up, which I really like as a phrase, by the way.
Right. And so you could probably be smooth and I don't know if you need a circular pedal stroke. You're going to be pushing down really hard. So maybe that's a fine thing to say, pedaling squares, but I don't think you need to have a poor pedal stroke. But I guess I see what they're saying. It's sort of like a left foot, right foot, 60 RPM.
Yeah, I like thinking more of it like stomps rather than squares.
Yeah. So I think that makes sense, but I think this person is going back. They've did it years ago, some of these European climbs, and so they're going back as an adult. We'll say, we're all getting older, but they've become, I think, a better cyclist over the years. The bike equipment, specifically the gearing that's on bicycles, has just like become more reasonable. We're not all trying to do what's the 5611? Is that we're not trying to push like stupid gears anymore. Most road bikes have compact, they have nice, easier gearing. So cadence wise, most of us should be in a better situation. This athlete, I think, is going to do fine going up this climb because they've done a lot of great riding and of various terrains riding as a mountain biker and as gravel racer. So they're used to this range in cadences where we might have to pedal for an hour up a climb and maybe the average cadence ends up being 70 RPM, but you're close to your threshold. So you're working moderately, if not hard, but then the cadence is low. And that's really the crux of this question is we can all pedal slow. When you're riding a beach cruiser to the store, your effort is super low and your cadence is low. And so we don't really care about that type of effort. But then what we want to do, and as we become more proficient cycling, we get high cadence, low effort. So everything under threshold, you could call like lower effort. And then everything above threshold could be higher effort, high intensity, at higher cadence. So that's, I think what he's alluding to there is that a lot of the pros, we're going to use a slightly higher cadence because they're very good and going very quickly, even up mountains that most of us would be crawling.
Well, I was going to say, it's very easy to pedal at 95 RPMs when you're putting out like, easily 300 watts.
Well, yeah, and like 500, yeah. And so that speed and cadence and power, there's sort of like a correlation there where I think you start seeing like everything's just creeping up. Some of that is related to the gearing and the options, but also just they push down harder more often and they put out more power, right? You can push down hard or you can do it more often or you can do both. And so that's what we're sort of seeing is if you and I go up there doing 200 watts,
I'll be pedaling at 25 RPM.
We're going to run out of gears. And so it isn't even a discussion because you're in your easiest gear doing the best you can, and that's the cadence. And so I think the equipment is going to help there for a lot of us. Again, we just aren't using as dumb of gears as we used to. The bikes have caught up to the fact that people would prefer not to have to grind up every climb in the world. And then sorry, where was I going with that? So then the cadence then for the pros, it's going to be higher because they have more power. So then even if they're in the same gear, they can do the same gear, but twice as fast and twice as hard, however that math works out. So we're seeing a bit of that going on. And I think that makes good sense. And then just to finish off, this is sort of the quadrant analysis. We sort of worked our way around from the beach cruiser is the bottom low left. So that's low, low. And then we had low cadence, what do we have? High cadence, high effort. And we had high cadence, low effort. That's right. So low effort. So that might be spinning in a Peloton, low effort, or drafting a car or whatever you've experienced. Tailwind would be like the classic. Like you can barely put out power because you're going so fast, but you can keep your cadence up. Very easy to keep the cadence up in that, you just let it spin. It naturally sort of like pulls your cadence up if you do that. That's one of the reasons to do motor pacing or riding in a group is you get this natural coordination exercise where there isn't a lot to push against. But you want the cadence to keep coming up. And maybe you even run out of gears on the other end in that scenario where you're in your hardest gear, but you have to pedal 100 RPM to even catch a gear, to even start moving the bike forward faster. Then we said high, high. So this would be just like a time trial or just really working as hard as you can to go as fast as you can. Generally, you're going to see that come up. And in most cases, this is that 90 RPM is the optimal, this is in quotes, optimal cadence. You're going to see people cluster towards that usually when it's especially a road setting, but even gravel. And if you watch the mountain bikers in the World Cup, like they start trending in that direction. And then finally, the low cadence, high effort. This is what we might call muscle tension intervals in training, where it's maybe like 60 RPM, but just lower RPM, even what we might call moderate RPM, but the effort is high. So this would be a steep climb. This would be anytime Molly is doing most work.
Literally anytime.
Sending it, but always at 60 RPM. And this could be like a track start where we start really slow, because they're in a fixed gear. So it's all good, and we want to have that sprinkling. But Molly's just working on an article right now.
I was going to say, I literally am working, like I just turned in an article on, knowing how to know when your cadence range needs to improve, basically. Right. So, if you do consider, pedaling at 60 RPM to be just so difficult and just like so uncomfortable, like, yeah, you do need to work on that because there are going to come times where, you're out of gears and 60 is going to be the fastest you can pedal.
And this is the key thing is, and what, can I say that who gave you the quote?
Yeah.
We should have him on because he's much better at talking, because I'm not a quadrant analysis expert, this like cadence versus force or torque thing that we just tried to stumble our way through. But his point was, Neil, did I say his name? Neil Stevenson?
No, Cody Stevenson. From
Oh, okay. This is a different Stevenson. Maybe there is no other Stevenson.
I think that's the only Stevenson I know.
I was thinking Neil Henderson, who's also great. Yeah.
Anyway, Cody Stevenson, who's the director of education at Training Peaks.
Okay, so he'd be a good person to have on for that. So the idea, though, is that it's only a limiter. So you can have a weakness. I don't know if these are the exact terms you'd use them, but so Molly has a weakness. She can't pedal at 90 RPM. She's very hard.
It's true. Very
hard at any output, but she's very strong at 60 RPM.
Also true.
And so the question would be, that could be a weakness, but not every weakness is a limiter in an event, because like, you just don't race bikes. So you can sort of do whatever you want because it's just cross training. And we say, we'd actually prefer our cross training sports. This is how we do cross country ski, both of us. We'd rather just be really bad at it and have like a great training effect. It's inefficient exercise. That's really what you want, is something you're not efficient at. Because if you get efficient at cross country skiing or swimming or cycling, it's harder and harder to put out work that's like, because you're so efficient, you just keep getting less and less energy goes into doing it. Whereas when we want training, we actually want inefficient training a lot of times, where it's actually harder to get the work done, if that makes sense. So for Molly, if she started racing crits, or
the times I have raced crits, it doesn't go great.
Right. Or even mountain biking, there's a lot of shifting required. There's a lot of changes in cadence. 60 RPM would be good to be able to operate as a mountain biker, but you also need to operate all the way up to 130 RPM, because a lot of times we don't get a chance to shift, or you're trying to spin into a climb. So there's a lot of coordination required to be a really good mountain biker. Road, again, as the top end, you probably have gearing now that rarely do you have to put out these big, long, low muscular or low cadence efforts. But anyhow, the idea with quadrant would be analysis, and limiter analysis would be, do you need to do that in the race? So we can look at the race, via quadrant analysis or file analysis, or just looking at the person racing and say, when you train, does it look like that? That's sort of what we're trying to get at is, are you on your mountain bike grinding up hills like you look like you're doing in the race? Or are you out on your road bike going 50 kilometers an hour with a tailwind all the time where you're just spinning along at 100 RPM and no load? Whereas in mountain biking, it's actually going to be a bunch of time at high load, high cadence, and high load, low cadence that we have to be really ready for. And so even just this morning when I was looking through getting you some screenshots of this quadrant analysis, I was like, because I definitely don't like low RPM, high force, and I've really avoid it as much as I can. But then that's often what my training looks like is I have lots of high cadence, high force. I'll do it even on a gravel road. And then in the race, inevitably, I have to push a bunch of times where it's lower cadence, high force. Again, when you're just in a steep climb and you have to push that, right? So 600 watts at 70 RPM even would make me cry.
So yeah, my guess is with this question, they're asking about how to kind of prep for it, and like, is that lower cadence something they should practice? So my assumption is the hills around them just do not mimic the Tourmalet, like the huge climbs that they're going to be doing. So they've been able to practice going uphill at this high cadence to prepare.
Right.
So yes, I think the quick answer to the question is yes, practice some climbing at that lower cadence just to be used to it. You don't have to do all of your training there, but definitely kind of being prepared for, when the pedaling slows down, are you comfortable in that range?
For sure. And so I tend to think that a lot of this happens if people are training specifically. So this person, again, I think is doing great. I think they're going to be really surprised, and I'm excited for that. But I like to also co-create with athletes when we're talking about workouts. If the athlete gets interested and is like, hey, I heard about this workout, or maybe, I'm feeling like maybe I need to do some low RPM to prepare, because this athlete's also done this climb in the past. So maybe they have some details about like what were the hard moments for them. And so whether they're going to break through that because they're at a higher fitness or they have better equipment, you still would be like, yeah, let's do it. So that's what we said. We'll do some muscle tension intervals, and they don't have mountains, to your point, around them that are an hour long or whatever it will take. But we can do these high effort muscle tension type intervals, which are very effective. Again, I just find them very overwhelming and very fatiguing. But something like you pedal at 60 RPM as hard as you can, do a few 5, 6, 7 hill repetitions like that. And that can be a very, very effective set of intervals. You could certainly combine that with a bit of something like a start sprint, especially if the person was still racing mountain biking. You might do something like that where they're getting exposed to that higher force as they're coming off that start, or something like force reps or stomps. Sometimes people call them, where it's you sort of slow right down. You're in maybe a bigger gear or just on a hill and you're slowed way down. You don't stop though. And then you stomp, usually from a seated position, to get the gear up to 90 RPM, 100 RPM, something like that. So these stomp sprints can be really effective just to get used to feeling that force. And that you could do on a trainer, or you could do it on a 10-second hill, right? You sort of just creep your way to the bottom, almost track stand, and then try and accelerate the cadence up to when it drops off, basically. So say 90, maybe 95 RPM, because that's what was in this question.
Love it. Okay, last question, the surprise question.
Okay.
It's not really that shocking, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot in the last couple of days here. Thoughts for, you're probably going to get this from some of your clients, and, certainly we have some listeners thinking about this, taking advantage of summer fun, the good weather, the rise with friends, all of that stuff versus what is in your training calendar. How do you help, athletes approach this? I'm like looking out the window and it's great paddleboarding weather. So, if I only have so much time to train, how do I balance the enjoying the summer and doing the things without totally neglecting the training?
Sure. I guess this is one of those depends, context specific. If you're coming into BC Bike Race.
If this is the week before BC Bike Race, do not do this.
Well, and would there still be space for a paddleboard where you're getting some exercise? We're not overdoing the bike. Maybe your bike's in the bike shop. So then that would be like an off day activity. So I would say primary is, we do think that cross training is great. And so it's always just talking to your coach or looking at your plan and saying how specific do we need to be right now? And is this activity going to be training, or is this a normal active person activity? And that question and the answer is very different for everyone, because what's a normal person activity is different for everyone. If you're super capable, super fit, really used to all these different things, you do maybe a bit of strength training, then going paddleboarding for an hour just is a normal person activity. Like even, we're not talking about racing paddleboards, obviously, right? So that's something you can absorb. Now, if you're pushing really hard and at the max training load, should you be out in the sun and depleting yourself a bit more if something urgent is happening the next day? But that's not the situation most people are in. So something like that, I just try and look at it through that lens. Like, is this replacing training, which could be okay? It's just cross training. Or is this just, we could call it a recovery activity or a normal person activity? This is like walking to work. Like, we don't need to count that in training for most people, because it's just not going to be such a load that it really matters, and you should be able to absorb that in the same way that, like, when you, like, could we boil it down to when you cook dinner, we don't log that as training, right? So some of these things are just normal person activity. It's probably way better than sitting and watching TV all day, and we expect you to do that. So for sure, get outside and do all that, especially if it's not race week where you're introducing something new. Now, do you think this also includes like bigger rides, or did you have a follow-up in regards to sort of like those things, the fun off bike thing?
Well, I think it could go both directions. There's like the starting to add all of these like big group ride adventures, on days where you don't necessarily have a lot of training scheduled. So you're actually increasing your hours. But then, the flip side is decrease. Like, I think there's like two types of people, right? There's I want to increase, like, I get invited on all of these like big adventures, so I'm going to go do these. And like, it's now like doubled my training volume that was planned for the week. And then there's, the more casual of summer activities where it is like, oh, I was supposed to do, a 90-minute ride with intervals, but my friends are, riding down to get like ice cream at the point. And that seems like more fun. Right, so, right. And again, like I think both of those options, like the long rides with friends or the, switching out for a casual ride with friends, are valid, occasionally. But I think like pretty quickly you can get to where you have you're no longer even on your training plan. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And so there's reflection there, I guess. A lot of times what we'll see, like that ride to the point to get ice cream might be a normal person activity, especially if some of your friends are normal people. And I say normal people in the most complimentary way, but they aren't people who are doing 100K gravel rides and 200-mile gravel races. Like, these are people that just ride their bike to go get ice cream, which is fantastic to have those friends. They really ground you to the real world. So in that case, maybe you do it after your ride, you meet them and go in if you have that time and that flexibility. It could be a second ride. Like, we have lots of friends that ride. Our friend Jody rides to the point most days of the week at 6 a.m. and he looks at the sunset and goes into the bay. And then in the evening, he often will go for a ride, at the end of the day. So there's certainly room for that if there's room for it in your life. The other thing you could look at is just, again, if you're negotiating your training plan or talking with a coach, is just, there's this ice cream ride I want to do on Tuesday. Could we do the interval ride on Monday? And then again, it's going to run into the weekend. So there might just be some rejigging of the format of the week. But for most people, there's room to sort of add that in. If the friend ride is turning into a group ride or a race or a challenge or an adventure, then this would be where we'd want to replace one or two rides in the week. And that's not bad. I often say, like, some of these group rides and challenges are things that you wouldn't do in training usually because you can't. For a variety of reasons. Motivation, you don't have the support. Sometimes you need people with you for navigation or for just the mechanical support for a lot of us, right? So it can't happen. And then there's always the group comparison and the drafting and things that we can't do in training. So probably you want these things to get dropped in periodically, but you wouldn't necessarily do this hard, long, epic group ride on a Saturday and then try and sort of cram your intervals in on Sunday. You'd probably either take a rest day or maybe just what we call unremarkable 90-minute ride on the Sunday where you ride. Yes, it counts. It keeps all the fitness moving, but it's unremarkable. It just is like a good ride that fills in there between the big, hard, exciting rides.
Perfect. All right, we will wrap up there. As always, if you have any questions, comments, etc., you can find us on at consummateathlete.com, at consummateathlete on Instagram. We now have an anonymous question form, so feel free to submit your training, racing, nutrition, etc. questions, and we will do our best to answer them. With that, happy riding. Hopefully everyone enjoys some of this fun ice cream riding this week. It's definitely hot enough for it. And yeah, we'll catch you soon. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.